Yeah, great.
Good morning, everyone. Wow, so many people. It's so great to see so many of you joining us this morning. Really quickly in the chat, if you'd like to let us know where you're tuning in from. We always love to see where everyone is at this very moment, all across the world. My name is Valerie Ndueni. I am a career advisor at CATS, Career Advising and Transition Services at McGill University, School of Continuing Studies. Welcome to PowerSkills. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce our facilitator today, our manager, our confidant, our mentor, Rosalia Felice.
Thank you so much, Valerie. I'm so glad you got to meet Valerie, and she will also be fielding questions with the rest of the CATS team. As Valerie said, my name is Rosalie, and I'm happy to introduce the rest of the CATS team. CATS, by the way, is career. Oh, no problem. CATS is Career Advising and Transition Services, and we're so thrilled to be here this morning, and we welcome all of you. I'd like to introduce the rest of the team. So Emily.
Hello and welcome, everyone. So nice to see
Nayo.
everyone here.
Hi, nice to meet you.
Deanna.
Good morning, everyone.
Volunteer Victoria, who is such an incredible volunteer. We all know the importance of volunteers. Thank you, Victoria. And the Dean of Continuing Studies, Carola Vile, is also here. So you'll see them as we field your questions. Speaking of questions, feel free to enter those questions in the chat. If you would rather voice your question yourself, no problem. Just indicate that you have a question and we will call on you during Balarama's speech. He will take questions throughout when and if time permits. I know we're gonna have a lot of questions for Balarama. And speaking of Balarama, we are so excited to have him here. And there's certainly a reason why he's our headliner, right? He's our kickoff, our first speaker. And as you can imagine, there's plenty of reason for that. I imagine you're here in great numbers because you know who Balarama is. You might have seen him on W5 or featured in the New York Times or as a regular guest on CJD radio in a lot of news articles, certainly lately. And you might have also heard that he's considering running for mayor of Montreal. Ooh. So this is a guest we are just thrilled to have, and thank you all for being here and sharing in this moment. This is the first of many sessions throughout the next 3 days, and we hope to see you there as well. Balarama, we're also excited to have you here because of everything going on in the world today. Politically, things are charged. There's a lot of divisiveness. There's a lot going on with COVID, and we think you're somebody who can help us navigate all this. And without getting into too many more details, because Balarama will tell you more about himself, please everyone, and you can unmute yourself if you want to clap, or you can just signal that you're excited to be here, but please help me warmly welcome Balarama Holness.
Yay. Well, good morning, everyone. Firstly, I just want to acknowledge that I am on unceded territory. We're all on unceded territory, and it's something that I take very dearly with my organization, Montreal in Action. And throughout this whole speech and this talk, I really want you to engage with me. And if you have questions and you have any form of thoughts or concerns or issues or feedback, feel free to jump in. Also, I really want to thank the CATS team for the amazing work that they've been doing and the opportunity to allow me to speak to all you all today. It's highly, highly appreciated. And I just want to warn you, throughout this presentation, I will be giving you a lot of private information, personal information. At times, I will be vulnerable. I'll speak to you about my success, but a lot of failures throughout my journey to being right here in this seat today. And in regards to failures, I think that it's important that we acknowledge them, that we recognize them, and that is part of being resilient and part of being humble as we transition through our lives and through our journeys to meet our destination. And we'll come to the idea of destination later on in this presentation. I want to take you back to 1979 at a Bob Marley concert right here in Montreal, where my mother, a French Canadian, blonde hair, blue-eyed woman from Montreal, meets my father, a Jamaican man from St. Elizabeth, the countryside of Jamaica, who speaks patois and English, and they meet at a Bob Marley concert. And they fall in love, they get married, and 4 years later, my twin and I are born. And as I reflect on the time before I was born and the way that my parents met at this Bob Marley concert right here in Montreal at the Forum of Montreal, you ask yourself, how did this love come to be in such a difficult time in North America, in Canada, in Quebec, where language, where race, where socioeconomic status divided us in the past and continue to divide us today? But the love and the good vibrations and the environment that they experienced erased those fictitious divisions. And those are the very seeds that I was born with, is seeds of love, also of rebellion in many ways, and you'll see this throughout my presentation, and seeds of standing up for your rights. But fundamentally, the fictitious divisions in society erased at the meeting of my parents, at this infamous concert. And that is really the foundation and the DNA that is intrinsic within me and stays with me throughout my whole life, is how can we create a society and give back a net positive to the world and find a way to erase those divisions. And that is really what I'm going to share with you today, is my journey to creating a more inclusive, a more loving, and a more tolerant society. Now, before I arrive at an ability to impact my society, there is a lot of ups and downs and turmoils and reskilling and resilience and reinvention. So I was born in Montreal, but at the age of around 9 months, I moved to an ashram. An ashram is essentially a Hindu community, a Hindu temple, where for 10 years, from the age of 9 months to around 11, I wake up every morning, I go to a morning program, I meditate, we are in nature, this is in West Virginia, and I'm experiencing spirituality, I'm experiencing the environment, and I'm experiencing nature in a very unique way. Right now, you're in Montreal, or you're in Germany, or you're anywhere in the world, and you think about the economy, you think about politics, you think about culture. But when you're embedded in spirituality and in nature, all of those, once again, fictitious divisions are not present. And that was a fundamental element and experience in my upbringing. And as I was nonetheless a rowdy, wild, very energetic young boy, and I looked up to the Swamis, I saw them go into this sweat lodge, this kind of rounded, hot box, if you will, with rocks in the middle. And every time they would go in, they would come out and they'd be sweating. They'd be all different colors, red, white, blue. But it seemed like a very, very wild experience. And around the age of 8 years old, I was asking that if I could go into one of these sweat lodges. And I was often told, no, you're too young, you cannot do this. However, through persistence, around the age of 9 years old, I was allowed for my first time to go into one of these sweat lodges. So I enter into the sweat lodge and I go to the back. And in the middle, there are these hot rocks and the ground was moist and warm. As soon as they closed the front cap of the sweat lodge, it became pitch dark. You couldn't see a thing. One of the Swamis took a bowl of water, threw it on the rocks, and I hear psss, and all this smoke and vapor flows in through the air, and it starts to get very, very hot. And I say, okay, I can do this. Now the second bowl of cold water goes into the rocks, and once again, psst, and the hot air and fumes begin to engulf me and engulf my lungs. Now on the third time, it becomes to the point where it is so hot that I get an immediate electric shock of panic, and I think that I am going to literally die or faint. And at that very moment, I made a decision. I made a decision to channel an inner calmness and to channel an inner strength, whereby I was going to relax and use the same fortitude, the same meditative state that I was working on every morning at the ashram, to simply relax. Because a panic in that situation could have been a matter of life and death, or fainting, falling on rocks, and having a catastrophic situation. Instantaneously, I relax, I absorb the heat, I welcome the obstacle, I welcome the danger, and my body relaxes, and I survive the situation. I exit the sweat lodge, and it's that at that very moment of survival that I knew that I had the resilience, the courage, and the ability and an inner strength to overcome anything. And at the age of 9 years old, this had a huge impact on me. It meant that any obstacle that I encountered, I would be able to overcome. Now, I arrived to Canada in 1993, and the Montreal Canadiens win the Stanley Cup, and I now find myself integrating into a society where the divisions that were inexistent in my ashram are very existent now. And those divisions, I was Anglophone, a young boy of color with an odd name, who is vegetarian, and simply does not fit in one way or another. And I don't really understand why. And during the referendum, I don't understand why, but I kind of understand that I am more of the no as opposed to the yes. I don't really know why, but it's explicitly and implicitly told to me that I don't fit the mythical norm of what it means to be a Quebecer. So now the fictitious divisions in society have calcified, and I understand who I am in society. And it turns out that I am a young, poor boy who is now, as I grow older, in high school, who's failing, who is smoking weed with his friends, rapping in bus stops and drinking 40s, unknowingly or knowingly have a sentiment that the institutions and the schools around me are not giving me the best opportunity to succeed. My influences are negative, and my overall environment isn't conducive to being a productive member of society. And I make an important decision through an epiphany I had in late 2001. In late 2001, I asked myself, why is it that people that look like me are at the basement of society? It's a question that I ask myself. When I look on TV, people that look like me are categorized in a certain way through stereotypes. When I look at the prison system, people like me are overrepresented in the prison system. When I look at City Hall or a Congress and the Senate south of the border, or right here in Canada, the House of Commons and the Senate, people do not look like me. I'm underrepresented. I ask myself this question. I also ask a professor this question. Why am I not represented in the curriculum? And the answer I got was, well, we do not study minorities, particularly in this particular subject. And that was a course on contested places in geography, which was very odd to me that I was not represented, or people that looked like me were not represented. And I come to an epiphany. And this is a key point of a key theme in this whole PowerSkills segment. Education. If I were to reskill and reinvent myself and empower myself through education, I would be able to tackle these fictitious divisions in society. And if you think up until today, I have 5 degrees. First degree is a Bachelor of Arts. I have a minor in health science and geography. Second degree is a Bachelor of Education. Third degree is a Master's of Education. 4 and 5 is Bachelor of Common Law, Bachelor of Civil Law. When I made the decision that education and reskilling and reinvention was going to be my shield and my sword to combat those fictitious divisions that I knew were fictitious because I lived in the ashram, I lived in the spiritual realm, if you will, where these don't exist, and you're judged based on, as Martin Luther King said, the content of your character, not the color of your skin. I knew that for me, that these divisions were fictitious and that education was going to be my sword and shield. Now, this does not go without obstacles. Arriving at the University of Ottawa, I'm playing football and I'm in school, I'm getting relatively poor grades, but one thing is for certain, I'm fast. My father, who is one of the top sprinters in Jamaica of his time, gave me a gift of genetics, of Jamaican speedy genetics. And fortunately for me, as I was playing football and as I decided to go down that road, I was fortunate enough to once again come to a turning point in my life, which was I am going to do everything in my power to go to the CFL. It was a decision that I made. And when I was 18 years old, having never played football in my life, I made that decision. And that optimism, even that innocence to say, I'm going to erase fictitious divisions through education, or I am going to do everything in my power to become a professional athlete. That innocence and that optimism coupled with hunger is fundamental. You have to fundamentally believe that the objective that you're achieving or that you want to achieve is going to come to its realization. You are creating in the present, you're creating the future by fundamentally believing that this is possible. And the big difficulty in reskilling or reinvention is that those fictitious divisions in society are dictating to you where you should go as opposed to what your heart tells you and where you believe you should go. So to reskill in order to get a job or order to get a position that is not attuned to where your heart or your mind is not reskilling, it's conformity. You're simply conforming to social pressure and to fictitious divisions in society. And then you're bound to failure that does not lead to success because it's not the road that you're meant to be on. And when I decide that I'm going to get those degrees, I fail out of grade 4, I failed out of secondary 4, but I still fight and I remain resilient. After my first degree, I applied for a master's in sports administration. I didn't get in. I applied for a master's in international development and I didn't get in. But those failures are not enough to counterbalance my passion for education to erase those fictitious divisions. So in the context of getting to becoming a professional athlete is getting concussions, breaking my foot, breaking my thumb, getting suspended from my football teams. And if I do have a few members from the University of Ottawa, they will tell you I got suspended on a few occasions. But all those obstacles, those difficulties, those trials, those tribulations are not enough to counterbalance where your heart lies. And for me, that was fundamental. So I arrive at a point where I'm in the CFL, I have my first degree, and I break my foot on March 11th, about 11 weeks before training camp. And I told myself, one day I might be in a talk just like this. And if I break my foot, which I did prior to going to join the Montreal Alouettes, and and this is the championship team, I did not want to have to tell my daughter or everyone here at PowerSkills that I almost won a championship, but I broke my foot before training camp. So it goes back to the same point where once I broke my foot, I did everything in my power through meditation. I channeled back to the lessons I learned in that sweat lodge to literally visualize and heal my foot, survive training camp, and win a Grey Cup. And once again, the obstacles and the broken bones and the failures and the pains, these are also fictitious barriers if your heart is in the right place and your mind is in the right place. Ultimately, nothing can stop you. So after the CFL, after I get a master's degree, my master's degree was something that also gave me an epiphany, whereby I read something along the lines of, from Anion, 1981, low-income kids get low-income information. And I read that during my master's degree. And now for someone who recognized that throughout my upbringing, I was getting low-quality information in my high school, someone who's passionate about education, well, what are they going to do? They're going to go apply to the best law school in the nation, and they're going to take 4 months to write their letter of statement, their personal statement, and they're going to do everything in their power to get into that program. And that's exactly what I did. A young boy who failed out of high school, had C's, who was not the best student, who grew up poor, really has no business at McGill Law. But a young boy who's resilient, who's courageous, who's willing to take all the risk and put everything to the forefront and follow his heart, does have business at McGill Law. And that is really what's fundamental and what dictates, in my view, who rises and who sinks, who swims or who sinks. And the biggest trigger or the common denominator is resilience. But you cannot have resilience without having your heart in the right place. So I go to McGill Law, and during my first semester, and this is where we get into contemporary realities right here in Montreal. During my time at McGill Law, I was reviewing some texts from my master's degree, and they gave me the definition of politics. The definition of politics is very simple. It's who gets what. And in my view, if I was going to erase those fictitious divisions in society, I had to empower people, empower marginalized people through education, through providing resources, sports infrastructure, the same tools and ingredients that I had to arrive at that position. I went to McGill Law in order to get the tools that I needed to become a lawmaker, or to be able to influence policy, or to be able to influence decisions. So during my first semester, I decide I am going to run for mayor of Montreal North, a borough that you cannot win, based on the fact that the incumbent mayor, Denis Coderre, was stationed there for 16 years, and it was a guaranteed victory. It was almost like a Democrat running in rural Texas. However, many people who are raised in societies that base their mentality on economics, on politics, they don't understand victories in the same way that I do. Running in Montreal North, the poorest borough in all of Canada, and highlighting the issues is a victory. And speaking of the pandemic, the epicenter of COVID-19 in Quebec is Montreal North. So 4 years before Montreal North became the epicenter of COVID-19, I looked at the makeup, the demographics, the economics of Montreal, and decided that's where my attention should be. So I run for mayor of Montreal North. I lose the election, but I win the moral, the ethical, and the substantive argument and battle whereby I'm highlighting these issues. And as I begin to highlight these issues and I dig deeper, I come to the realization that I'm empowered now. It's no longer about doing a small act of kindness, which are important. I'm going to do a major act of kindness. I'm going to do something that is grand, that's going to shake the system. If there's systemic racism, then I'm going to put in systemic change. And I'm going to use the law to do it. And the law, fundamentally, judges and lawyers are the architects of society. They decide the order in which society is governed. And the fact that society in many ways is inequitable is because largely of judges and lawyers who have upheld these systems, these laws, and these orders. The reason why an Indigenous man was frozen to death a few days ago is because of law and order through a lens of inequality, of insensitivity, and lack of compassion. So in order to remedy some of these issues, empowered by McGill law, I read the Montreal Charter and I find out that through the right of initiative, this very magical clause, I can get 15,000 signatures and force the city of Montreal to have a conversation about systemic racism. An issue that I didn't even want to talk about because it was controversial. Quote unquote, I could become the angry Black man, or the fact that my mother is white, people in the Black community would say, well, you're not even Black enough to talk about this issue. Who are you to speak for us? Or you're not even from Montreal North. You're not even French. You lived in the US for 10 years. Who are you to tell us in Montreal how to act? There are all these critics. But once again, when your heart is in the right place, it's silent. Or the fictitious barriers will simply dissolve because your heart is in the right place and you know where you're going, and all the reskilling, the way that you have been resilient empowers you to tackle that initial or that problem or that challenge that you're facing. So what do? I gather 50 community leaders. We go out to the disaccord and to the melancholy of the mayor of Montreal, who denied systemic racism when we were addressing the issue in 2017. We get 22,000 handwritten signatures. We deposit this petition that automatically activates a law that establishes that the city of Montreal has to have a consultation on systemic racism. And what happens? There are 38 recommendations. The first 3 recommendations get implemented. A commissioner becomes named. A member of the executive committee is now responsible for the 38 recommendations. And the mayor recognizes systemic racism. In any democracy, it's the citizens who have the power. Having lived in Egypt, having lived in the United Arab Emirates, having been to many areas in North Africa, including Morocco, Malaysia, and Southeast Asia, Malaysia, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, Oman. I've been throughout the world, including Turkey. And when you are in certain environments where democracies are fragile and law is fragile and arbitrary and authoritarian, and you come to Canada, we are living in one of the most beautiful countries in the world, if not the most beautiful country, both geographically and as well legally and democratically. We do have our issues, certainly, but it's flexible, it's malleable. So I take on the challenge of pressing upon the city the same vision I had as a young boy when I recognized those fictitious divisions, and I asked them, and even demanded, and even forced through the law to be more compassionate, to be more humane, and to be more tolerant. And all of that is made possible by reskilling, through reinvention, and most of all, being resilient and following your heart. So that's all for now in terms of the presentation. I want to thank you so much for listening. I will open it up to questions and maybe give you a 1-minute break because I'm going to charge my laptop. Can you pass me the charger?
Fantastic.
And
So you
yeah,
can
thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Balarama. And that's why this session was called Renaissance Man. I think we found out why. So please feel free to put your questions into the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you for questions as soon as Balarama is ready. And we welcome any questions you have. Thank you.
If you want, I could just take some of these comments. Ala Sufi, we have to be honest about what we want and take the risk rather than lie to ourselves and make excuses to stay in our comfort zone. Key word is risk. Is when I decide that I'm going to announce that I'm going to get this petition for 15,000 signatures, there's enormous risk. There's risk of failure. There's risk of reprisal. There are so many risks involved, but the risk is also a mental obstacle that you're also imposing on yourself. Because once again, if you're following your heart and you are dedicated to what you are set out to do, the risk becomes mitigated. And if I were to ask you, I was in a taxi a few days ago in an Uber, and I was unsure about doing a few things, and I was talking to the Uber driver, and he gave me a very simple thought, and we've all heard this before. If you won the lotto, would you still be doing what you're doing? And if the answer is yes, then you're following your heart. And so once again, so taking risks and becoming someone who is authentic to yourself, and you're not bowing to social pressure or you're not bowing to what society expects of you, you are more likely to take those risks and to achieve your objective. And even if you don't, if there are failures, and throughout this presentation, I spoke to you about my failures, but over the long run, you will be on the right side of history and you will be successful.
Thank you, Balarama. The Dean of Continuing Studies, Carola, has some questions. Do you want to voice your questions, Carola?
Sure. I put it in the chat too, but Balarama, I was struck by something that you said earlier about, you could be an angry Black man, but I think, and you obviously made choices that allowed you to channel what you saw in very productive ways. I wonder though, oftentimes people will have made up their mind about what you are saying before you've even said it.
Yes.
And how do you overcome the reaction that you might get as a man of color when you may not be speaking about issues of concern only to men of color, but in fact to all of us?
Yeah, that's a great question. And my answer is that I don't even acknowledge those critics, because if you do, you are bound to fail. So when I go on La Semaine des 4 Juillet and I speak to a majority white Francophone audience, if I have to think about how you're going to perceive me and act in accordance, it's not going to work. Today's presentation, I wrote 3 words: Renaissance, reskilling, resilience. And if I am going to present to you today, or to present to anyone about who I am and what I do, I'm always going to give you what's on my heart, what's on my mind. So if someone were to think or stereotype me in a certain way, I cannot react to that statement or even to that thought. By being yourself, you win over the long run. Being authentic to yourself, you win over the long run. in 2017, when I announced the petition to deal with systemic racism in Montreal, the whole city was against me. Minority communities, Francophone communities, everyone. But as time progressed and things happened, they said, not only is this person authentic, he has a point. And it took the murder of George Floyd, it took the murder of Joyce Echaquan. It takes all these instances for people to become awakened to certain issues. And by staying authentic, they know that you are the right person for this mission, and they can then deal with you on that level. But whether they think you are or not has no impact on you, because you are going in a certain direction. And as Martin Luther King would say, the arc of the universe bends towards justice. And if you are working to bend it towards justice, no one else outside the arc has an impact on you, because you're on the right side of history. And so you feel empowered by the fact that you know you're on the right side of history and you're being authentic. So you are bound to succeed. And that success, and I mentioned it at the beginning of the presentation, I used the word destination, and you will find your destination. But the thing with morality or ethics or equal rights, it is not a destination, it's a pursuit. So you're always in pursuit of a more egalitarian society. So that's also what drives you, because you know, as Barack Obama had his book, you know, Dreamland or the Promised Land, you never get there. It's a process through which you hope one day you will get there. But because it's such a tall task, any naysayer or critic has no influence on such a monumentous challenge that you have in front of you.
Thank you. And Balarama, we have so many questions, but I'm going to ask you this one, because this is certainly something we talk about on the CATS team. What is the best way to be an advocate for minorities without overstepping or taking attention away from the cause? And that's a question from Leah.
Yeah, join an organization, volunteer. Sometimes the small acts of kindness and the amalgamation of those small acts of kindness do make a difference. And that brings me to a very, very important point that I want to raise today. When we think about systemic discrimination, we often think about these laws, these protocols, and these practices, and very macro and institutional. But there's another important element that people often forget. In the definition and in the understanding and how people articulate it, there's also a social process. So the hundreds and millions of actions by people in everyday life, the way that they speak to people, their prejudices, their stereotypes, all these different things uphold this system that's discriminatory. That social process you can engage in. So simply providing kind words to a person, simply helping someone, cross the street, helping someone with groceries, volunteering at an organization, you are in the front lines of the battle of morality or immorality, and morality or ethics and unethics, equality and discrimination. You are on the front lines because you are tapping into the core of the social process. So even those small acts of kindness make a huge difference. And if you could join an organization or get other people around you to join you, the more capacity you can build, the more impact you can have. But do not undermine or discredit or ignore those small acts of kindness, because they do make a massive difference.
Thanks for the question, Leah, and thank you, Balarama, for answering that. And I think that's a question a lot of people ask themselves, and thank you for those tips and that great advice, because sometimes it's obviously feeling like something is so overwhelming that you couldn't possibly make a change. So I love that you said every act of kindness and the amalgamation of that makes a difference. So
Absolutely.
Thank you. Does anyone in the CATS team, there's so many questions. So if somebody wants to speak up that had their question, or if somebody in the CATS team wants to select one of the many questions in the chat for Balarama.
I might just jump in right here.
Perfect.
So just from Fatou Seka, a lot of youth today are overpowered by self-doubt and imposter syndrome. And that is a very, very important point. And I must admit, when I was in my first year in university, I didn't apply to teachers college because I didn't think I was going to get in. Despite the fact that I was a student athlete, yeah, I had average grades, but you know, I was doing physical education and health science and geography. I didn't apply because I didn't think I was going to get in. And I didn't apply. And I certainly didn't get in. And the issue is that self-doubt also comes from your environment. And the challenge for us as a society is to ensure that young boys and girls who might not fit the mythical norm, just like I did when I came to Canada, I was, I suppose, implicitly told that you're not really good enough to fit into every economic or institutional or employment possibility here. And maybe that was ingrained in me, and that inferiority complex stayed with me up until university, where I didn't apply to a program that, you know what, I applied for a few years later after the CFL and got in. So that self-doubt, we have to ensure that we rid those roots at an early stage in young people, and that we empower them through experiential learning. We empower them through simply telling them that, hey, you can do this. And that's a very difficult thing, because we are re-educating and re-skilling young boys and girls who are often minorities. We are ridding them of the condition that they were taught that they were inferior. And in my Master's of Education, one of the things that kept coming up time and time again is right here in Canada, especially in the 1960s, teachers would tell young boys and girls of color that they were inferior, and they adopted that behavior. So, and that's a huge challenge. And I think that goes back to the first question, whereby the small acts of kindness you can do to empower young boys and girls of all backgrounds is essential to rid themselves of that self-doubt. And once again, that can make a huge impact in someone's life. So you don't have to change a law or some grandiose thing. You could change someone's life by empowering them and simply giving them the confidence to tackle their dreams, if you will.
Thank you. And you mentioned volunteering as something that people can do if they're interested in the cause, for lack of better words. Can you talk to us a little bit about your organization, Montreal en Action, and how people might get involved?
Sure. Just really quickly, I'll just put in our website here, and maybe after we can send some information. But so we are a nonprofit organization. Our main goal is to ensure that the 38 recommendations, from the public consultation become implemented. So it's issues of culture, issues of employment, issues of public security, racial profiling, social profiling. Urban planning is really, really important. Speaking to the David Suzuki Foundation right now, is within the city of Montreal, there are green spaces. And lo and behold, the epicenter of COVID-19 has the least amount of green spaces and the highest rate of, or the lowest rate of life expectancy in the island, even before the pandemic. So green spaces are linked to life expectancy and linked to, obviously, the disproportionate impact of COVID-19. So environment is hugely important to our organization. Indigenous rights, anything related to human rights, equality, justice, inclusion is what we address. And we are an organization, we take action, we take risk. We send press releases, we have action teams, we have a great communications team. So we really try to influence and restructure and reconstruct society, and specifically Montreal.
Wonderful. And we will email you information. So everybody who attended this session, we'll send you that link, and anything else that comes out of the references on the side, any other links. So thank you. We have a question from Magda. Sometimes the heart says one thing one thing and the mind an opposite one. How do you balance them?
It's called intuition. You have to follow your intuition and what your gut tells you. And I think that, so my mother passed away in 2013. And one thing she gave me is intuition. And I think that, women especially have that intuition. A child lives within you, and my daughter is 18 months now. My laptop is stacked on her child books, on her little reading books here. You have to follow your intuition. You have to follow your gut. And one way that you might lose that intuition, this is open to interpretation, but I think that social media, TV, what Noam Chomsky calls manufacturing consent, by way of influence and the way that you learn through observation influences your decisions. And getting back in touch with nature, and this is not something that's like holistic and new agey. Early educators had a huge emphasis on nature and education and connecting with yourself. And anytime you go to the Laurentians or you go to nature, you have a different feel. So taking the time to relax, to reconnect with yourself, reconnect with nature, you can get back to that intuitive aspect. And then you can come back and understand where you can go. But we are conditioned through a variety of different mechanisms in society that sometimes make us lose direction. So you have to reconnect.
Wonderful, thank you. That's a great answer to that. I love that, between the heart and the mind, but it's something we all have, but we don't all listen to. And when you were talking about that, so many hearts went up when people said it's your intuition. A lot of hearts went up. So, and as you say, mostly from women. So that's interesting too. I have a question that is really something that we hear a lot about cats. Rashid asks, what about one who doesn't have good English or French skills and has a terrible accent? And this speaks, of course, to discrimination and perceived notions and expectations. So what advice do you have for someone with an extreme accent who is lacking the language skills required here to get ahead?
It's very difficult. Even bar school asked me to give me a French equivalency exam. So it's not just, new immigrants who come here with an accent or who don't speak either language. There are anglophones here in Quebec. Et moi, je suis bilingue, je parle français. J'étais à l'école en français, j'ai pris des cours de droit en français. J'étais au secondaire en français. And even at that, you still get pushback. So we fully understand. And this goes back to what your mission is. If your mission is set and you have something that you're hungry for, that you have a fire that burns in your belly, the fictitious divisions of language cannot be overcome by simply saying, yeah, you have a passion and go and do it. But that drive will help mitigate that obstacle. I'm not saying that it's going to completely erase, but I would say, what's your passion and where is your heart leading you? If your heart is leading you in a certain direction, I lived in China for a bit. I lived in the United Arab Emirates, as mentioned, and Egypt. You can learn some of the languages. I'm not going to speak too much Mandarin, but I do know a little bit. But if you're passionate enough about it, immerse yourself in the language and fight to achieve your objective, but it comes back to your heart and your passion and your fire. And as you see me talking, you can see that I'm passionate about these things. When you're speaking to your friends about what you want to do, you need to ask them, maybe not, but you need to ask them, when I speak about these issues, do you feel that I'm impassioned? Or ask yourself that. And if you're not, maybe you're not in the right domain. You're in a difficult circumstance, but you can overcome those language barriers by following your intuition and following your heart. That's what many people have done, and that's what I've done in my experience.
Thank you. And we'll send you the chat, Balarama. So many comments of people thanking you for your presentation and thanking you for the inspiration, and a few people begging you to run for mayor of Montreal. So we're happy to share that with you so you can read them. You've been so gracious with your time, and we're actually a little bit over time, but I'll see if Does one person have a burning question that they just don't want to leave this session without having answered? And there's many unanswered questions in the chat, and we apologize. But if somebody wants to speak up and ask one last question, now's your chance. Unmute yourself and go ahead and ask that question.
Okay, I have just done that. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
we hear you.
My name is Rasha Ayubi. Thank you so much for the presentation. Really great, great talk. You mentioned in your talk about lawyers and judges, and this is where change in terms of the legal system for addressing issues of discrimination. And this is a really important point because I feel I've been in this country, in this city for 30 years now, and I still encounter issues of discrimination in the workplace specifically, but it is, of course, throughout society. So how do we take it to the next level so that the talk of discrimination doesn't only stay at the political level, but rises to the legal level, and we start holding organizations accountable through the legal system and not just through politicians and talk? Because with politicians, it stays there and it sometimes just lives in a circular, talk, and nothing happens, nothing changes in the day-to-day life of people. So what would your recommendations be? What would your vision be in terms of elevating the discussion so it's at the legal level?
Yes, so it's a good point, but I would not completely eliminate the executive from the legislator. So politics and law are interconnected. The House of Commons produces bills and the Senate signs them. There's a royal assent and legislation occurs. If we want to change the criminal code, or we want to put in different forms of, Employment Equity Act, these are done through lawmakers. And I think, I'll end on this, and this goes for everyone, is that when a quote unquote, say a politician enters into politics, and prior to that, they were an advocate, for example, or anything else. Once they get into that arena, they lose their roar. The famous stories, the children's books, the lion who lost his roar, or the lionesses who lost her roar. And that is the issue, is that whether you are a judge, a lawyer, or a lawmaker, and you have deeply embedded ambitions and visions for society, once you get into power, you lose your roar. And that is the issue. We can right now at the federal level, and I've spoken to members of parliament about this at the Minister of Justice, we could do a lot to reform the criminal code, and nothing was done since George Floyd, since the Prime Minister took his knee. And if we have lions that lose their roar once they get into parliament, once they become prime minister, or once they become in the Senate, or once they get to the House of Commons, or you have judges and lawyers who lose their roar once they become, once they get in front of a court or they're in a court, that is where the issue lies. So it goes back to who is going to remain authentic throughout their livelihood, no matter how much power or prestige or whatever level they get to. Are you going to maintain your roar? And I think that is the issue, is that we have politicians, judges, and lawyers that lost the courage to stand up for what is right. We were unable as a society to be compassionate enough to create an environment that homeless people during a pandemic would have a warm place to stay and not die frozen. And that is the blood is on the hands of politicians who lost their roar and lost their compassion. And that is what it comes down to. And fundamentally, regardless of the job that you're in, or regardless of the career path that you are pursuing, you must maintain your roar, that fire, that hunger, that resilience. And at the end of the day, ensure that you have a net positive impact in society and on society. We are in 2021. We are experiencing a pandemic, and the pandemic is ongoing. So we all must ensure that we have a net positive impact on society. We maintain our roar. And if we all do this in this room and we influence other people to do the same, Well, 2021 will be better than 2020, inshallah, hopefully.
What a way to end. It reminds me of the idea of absolute power corrupts absolutely. The idea of once you're in power, that, yeah, I love that. The line loses its roar. So thank you. You promised at the beginning, Balarama, that you would be authentic and that you would be vulnerable. And not only that, but you were certainly generous with your time and gracious. We can't thank you enough for being here with us today. I think you've given us all a lot to think about. And I know there's a lot of well wishes in the chat, and somebody said, keep roaring. So I think we'll end with that. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.